You know, making these videos made me realize just how many races were in Warhammer 1. The last episode we just started talking about the races from Total War Warhammer 2, and in this episode we finished them off. The Skaven got a lot of love, and as such there are only a few characters left who I think need to be in the game. As for the Vampire Coast and Tomb Kings, they lack a lot of the lore that the Skaven had, and so while they don't have as many characters, I still only gave them both 2 lords. But enough of minor spoilers, it's time to get into the characters, starting with a few rats of unusual size. If there is one thing a Skaven desires, it is the favor of the Great Horned Rat, for to have the favor of the Dark God would offer you the protection from the normal schemes and betrayals common to Skaven society. Without this, you would have to rely on a little bit of luck and cunning to stay in a position of power. Whether Thanquol carries the favor of the Horned Rat or just a lot of luck is unknown, but he has lived through many battles that the average Skaven would have died in. The determined antagonist of Gotrek and Felix, his exploits have seen him across the world, from dwarven holds and Skaven under empires. He has even launched invasions into the jungles of Lustria. All these adventures have led to a long list of near successes, as his plans have consistently been undone by the meddling heroes Gotrek and Felix. He has worked with many clans, including clans Mulder, Skryre, and Eshin, and for his efforts, he has been gifted a giant mutant rat ogre as a bodyguard. Named Bone Ripper, this bodyguard is not quite as lucky as the powerful Grey Seer Thanquol, and has repeatedly died. Whenever this happens though, Thanquol is gifted a brand new rat ogre, which he always names Bone Ripper, sometimes reusing bits and pieces left over from the previous one. With a character such as Thanquol, it is easy to underestimate the sheer pandemonium he can cause. With a start position of Talabheim, smack dab in the middle of the Empire, who could foresee the chaos one rat may cause the world of man? The origins of demons are often unsettling and grisly affairs, for a great deal of twisted and dark powers are needed to create such monstrosities. Such is the origin of the Vermin Lord Screech Vermin King. He was born out of one of the most successful councils of 13 in the history of Skavenkind, the same council that saw the downfall of the great necromancer Nagash. It was after many failures that this once great council was punished by the Horned Rat, and each member was cast into a dark pit within the realm of ruin. After an unknown but vast amount of time, the Horned Rat finally relented and freed the council. But what emerged from that pit was not what had originally entered. It was a hideous abomination of conjoined Skaven. The Great Horned Rat saw opportunity with this creation, however, and after a few bolts of black lightning, the Horned Rat had shaped the creature into the demon Screech. Summoned into the mortal world by none other than Thanquol, he proceeded to unleash his plans to bring ruin and destruction to the world of man. With a deep knowledge of disease from the forefathers of Clan Pestilence, the stealth of Clan Eshin, the technological insight of Clan Skryre, the flesh-molding ability of Clan Mulder, the arcane power of the Grey Seers, and the ambition of the warrior clans, Screech Vermin King is perhaps the most Skaven of the Skaven there has ever been. He would start his Immortal Empire campaign at the Temple Avenue of Gold, within the jungles of the gods, where he will unleash all his foul talents against the enemy of the Horned Rat. As for Skaven heroes, I have picked 2 which represent both the upper echelons of power and the lowliest of Skaven society. Skritter is the herald of the Council of 13 and a powerful Grey Seer. Arrogant, vain, and with a lust for power, this horned Skaven is carried around by 4 albino storm vermin, offering the powerful magic user a more physical defense. Scabicus is my other choice of legendary hero, the most famous Skaven slave to ever exist. He led a rebellion along with his fellow slaves within Skavenblight itself. True to his story, you may decide to crush his rebellion and supply your armies with a large influx of food, or you may have more devious schemes in mind, allowing the would-be hero to buff up an army of Skaven slaves. Whatever use you make out of these 2 Skaven heroes, it's up to you, but they both make for interesting insights into Skaven culture. The Vampire Coast is a very unique faction in Warhammer. Combining 2 of the most cold-hearted tropes in fantasy, the vampire pirates have an equal amount of swashbuckling fun and shambling undead forces. The Vampire Coast is also one of the only factions that boasts an entirely made-up character as part of their roster, with Cloistra Direfin commanding her own ghostly Bretonnian force. If they could do it once, they could do it again, because I think we are due a female Cathaian vampire, an offshoot of the jade-blooded vampire lineage of the old lore and the real history of Chinese pirates. I think a character like this has a lot of potential, and I think it would be one that fans would be into seeing take form. They would start their campaign in Chimay, where they could sail the coast of Cathay or set out to the western side of Lustria for even more raiding opportunities. A character like this would surely spice up the new lore of Grand Cathay. Many ghost stories lurk within the minds of sailors and merchants who travel the great ocean. Tales of ghostly ships and sea serpents are par for the course, but there is no character so hated as the traitorous Vangeist. He was hired by an archmage of the Lore of Light to ferry him across the ocean. The mage offered Vangeist and his crew a wealth of gold for their loyalty, and ordered them north. Eventually, curiosity of the mage's intentions overcame Vangeist and his men, and through cunning plans, Vangeist found out that the mage seeked to slay a fireworm of Tzeentch from the far northern reaches of the sea. But the pirate also discovered that the fireworm's lair housed the secret to eternal life. Tempted beyond belief, the pirates planned their betrayal, and once the fireworm was slain and their original mission achieved, Vangeist shot the mage and dumped his body overboard. On north, the mutineers sailed into the Chaos Wastes. They sailed for what seemed like ages, and eventually passed into the realms of chaos themselves. The crew encountered many torments in the twisted forms of chaos demons and sea beasts. On northward they traveled still, until they sailed upon the seas of the Chaos Moon Morsleb. They remained within those unholy lands for what seemed like maybe centuries. Eventually, the realms of chaos spat them back out into the mortal world, where the secret of eternal life took the form of a ghostly curse. Vangeist's ship no longer sailed the ocean waves, but rather floated above the waters, as even the sea god Mathlan was disgusted by his treachery. Vangeist eventually joined forces with Count Noctilus and became a part of the Dread Fleet, which would do battle against the Grand Alliance of Jago Roth in the fight for the souls of those lost at sea. In Immortal Empires, the arch-traitor Vangeist would start at the port of the Folly of Malefax, in the Chaos Wastes where he was first condemned down his frightful path. The Vampire Coast is a faction that lacks many named characters to choose as legendary heroes, but the Brine Wife would make for a good pick. A former witch turned undead Cyrene after Luther Harkin tossed her into the sea. She has been both an enemy and an ally of the Pirate Lord since, so she would be willing to work with the rest of the vampires if they called on her. I think it would be awesome if each Vampire Coast pirate received their own legendary hero in the form of their first mates. That is easy to do for the likes of Luther Harkin, Vangeist, and Aranessa, who each have Drekla, Rotten Einrich, and Og Halfheart, respectively, but it would require the other lords to receive their own named characters. Perhaps Noctilus could get Scretch, the undead Skaven who joined his Dreadfleet navy. Some work would need to be done for this to work, but I think it is a wonderful idea. The history of the Tomb Kings is a long and ancient one. Back when the Priest Kings still had blood flowing through their veins, they were one by one conquered by the warmongering Settra. Many Priest Kings fought back against the leader of Khemri, but Settra's might was too great and his armies were too vast. Eventually, Settra would conquer much of Nehekhara, but when his forces marched towards the land of Merek through the Valley of the Kings, they were ambushed by the only man who would stand against Settra throughout his entire life. King Far was a proud leader who, much like Settra, refused to bow before any mortal. He had purged the lands of greenskin hordes, allowing his great city of Merek to prosper, and now he stood to protect it once more against a seemingly unstoppable Settra. For decades, King Far would succeed in driving off the armies of Settra until he eventually died of old age. He was the only king not to pay the conqueror's tribute. After his death, though, Settra easily managed to claim Marek as his own. When Far awakened many years later as one of the first Tomb Kings, he was so furious to find out his descendants failed to protect his city that he stormed into their tombs, burned their corpses, destroyed their pyramids, and shattered their charred skeletons with his sacred flail of skulls. Even after death, King Far would stand against Settra. He begins his campaign in Immortal Empires in Marek, the city he fought so hard to protect, where he must once again clear the land of greenskins and lead his forces against the tide of Settra. Many times had the forces of the Tomb Kings led invasions into the border princes. When he was alive, Amenhotep the Great led fleets of warships into present-day Dalia and conquered much of those lands in the name of Ulatib, the vulture god. In truth, while he spent much of his time in the region in battle, he loved the lands that would one day become Dalia. Unlike many kings, Amenhotep did not force his rule against the lands he conquered. So long as his tribute was paid, he allowed them to be ruled as they pleased. He had conquered so much land that he was actually buried in the lands he conquered, rather than the lands he came from. Far up north was his tomb in Zandri, where he could be closer to the lands of Dalia that he loved. As a Tomb King, the lands he had conquered in life were no longer conquered, and there was little evidence that he was ever even there. Perhaps that is why Amenemhotep is content to serve under Setra as a naval commander, leading his fleets into invasions of the border princess's domain and protecting the coast of his home from pirates and raiders. A ruler of the ocean rather of the land, I have Amenemhotep starting in Berikvar, where he can sail along the Black Gulf as he used to do, both attacking the coast of the border princes in Talia and defending the coast of his homeland. The Tomb Kings are yet another faction that is a clear fan favorite candidate for a legendary hero. Apophis the Scarab Lord was once a prince of Numis, who murdered his whole family in their sleep in order to claim the throne for himself. But the people of Numis were loyal to the king and rebelled against Apophis. He was taken from the throne and punished by being locked in a tomb with flesh-eating scarabs. His soul itself was condemned to be tormented for eternity in the underworld, but he made a deal with Usurian, the god of that realm, to bring him souls in hopes of finding one as vile as his to replace him. He is now a wandering executioner in the form of a skull atop a mass of scarab beetles. My other pick would be Remetep the Visionary, who was the greatest Necrotech in Nehekhara history. His Ushabti constructs were uncannily lifelike, and the tombs he designed were some of the most beautiful in the world. He will provide a nice boost for all constructs within your army. And that's it. The entirety of Game 2 is done. I think the Skaven lords I picked are very uncontroversial. Thankwall is the biggest Skaven character still missing, and Screech is the first of the Vermin lords. The Skaven are a faction that is well spread out over the map, but until now they lacked a true presence in the Empire. And if any Skaven were to terrorize the Empire, it would be Thankwall. For the Vampire Coast, I think my picks are really some of the last possible options for legendary lords. I don't see any of the other Dreadfleet characters making it as a lord for the faction, and I don't think there's another vampire like Luther Harkin who can easily slot in. Vangeist is easily the coolest of the remaining characters, and I think a Cathay vampire would add a lot to the faction. I really hope Kingfire will make it into the game eventually. Setra is kind of set up as the Tomb King character, but highlighting that rivalry that he had in the lore would be awesome. Amenemhotep would also provide the Tomb Kings with a very unique start and really drive home that in the lore, Tomb Kings often invaded the lands of Talia and the Border Princes. I'm really happy with all my picks for these factions, and I'd love to know what you all think about them. Next time we're going to be heading into Game 3, where we can talk about ogres, hopefully before the upcoming Ogre DLC gets announced. See you then.